Hi, I'm Darren. Welcome to this Examiner's Head screencast. This is on Aqa GCSE English Language, Paper 1, Question 2. Okay, so the objectives, to understand the assessment objectives that you're going to be assessed on for this particular question, and this really does focus in on how the writer uses language to achieve effects, and also to make sure that you use the correct subject-specific technical language when you're writing your answer. And then what we'll do is we'll look at a couple of sample answers, a medium grade and a high grade answer to work out how they achieve their particular grades. So the assessment objective for question number 2 is AO2. Explain, comment on, analyse how writers use language and structure to achieve effects, and using that relevant subject terminology to support your view. So what is it specifically with assessment objective 2? You're moving on from the first question, which just really asks you to list stuff. And now you're going to have to actually comment on it and explain how the writer achieves the effects they do. It's language with question 2, so it's not a structure question. That will come on to with question 3. And then you need to use this correct subject terminology, which we'll come on to in a moment. Okay, so let's look at the question. It's going to ask you to read a section of the text. It usually follows straight on from the question 1 section, and then it will give you a few bullet points to help you structure the answer. Look in detail at this extract from lines 6 to 14 of the source. How does the writer use language here to describe Rosabel's bus journey home? You could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. So a couple of tips before you start to dive into trying to answer this question. First one is this. Look back at the question, underline the key words. Work out exactly what this question is asking you to do. And in this case, you're focusing on language and you're focusing on Rosabel's bus journey home. This will stop you from going off task. One of the big challenges with students getting the higher grades is they simply don't answer the question properly. If you underline the key words in the question, you're much more likely to answer it correctly. The second tip here is to use those bullet points. It says you could include. It really should say if you don't include, you're completely mad, because those are the things you're going to be asked to write about. Okay, before we actually look at some sample answers and analyse how they're effective, what I'd like to do is just to go into how you could approach the passage to sort of prepare you really, really well for answering that question. Okay, so here's the passage that you'll be asked to read. So we're going to read it through, and then we're going to think about how we can actually prepare by making notes, by underlining, etc., so that when we come to write the answer, we write a really good answer. Rosabel looked out of the windows. The street was blurred and misty, but light striking on the panes turned their dullness to opal and silver, and the jewellers' shops seen through this were fairy palaces. Her feet were horribly wet, and she knew the bottom of her skirt and petticoat would be coated with black greasy mud. There was a sickening smell of warm humanity. It seemed to be oozing out of everybody in the bus, and everybody had the same expression, sitting so still, staring in front of them. Rosabel stirred suddenly and unfastened the 2 top buttons of her coat. She felt almost stifled. Through her half-closed eyes, the whole row of people on the opposite seat seemed to resolve into one meaningless, staring face. Okay, so we know that we're going to be looking at language, and we're going to be, and we're going to be focusing on the bus journey, okay? These are really, really important points. So let's go through and think specifically about the journey home. So we know if she looked out of the windows, it's the journey home on the bus. The light striking the panes turned their dullness to opal and silver. That's the journey home. The jeweller shops seen through this, seen through the panes, were fairy palaces. But look at the next sentence. Her feet were horribly wet. Bottom of her skirt and petticoat would be coated with black greasy mud. That's not the best journey home. That's before she got on the bus. So you can ignore that sentence. This often is what happens. They might put in a passage which kind of not tries to catch you out, but makes you read closely, which is why you have to really make sure you understand the question. Sickening smell of warm humanity, well, yes, that's on the bus. Oozing out of everyone, that's on the bus. Everybody had the same expression. Rosabelle stirred suddenly, unfastened the 2 top buttons of her coat, felt stifled. That's her, that's not the journey home. A whole row of people on the opposite seat seemed to resolve to a meaningless staring face. You could actually talk a little bit about the stifled, because actually it's her response to the journey home. But certainly this one, her feet were wet, that's not specifically to do about the bus. So you can see what we've started to do is we've started to pick out those key points, those key quotes that focus on the question. We can then start to look more carefully and make a few notes around the passage itself, just using a pen. It's fine to write all over the excerpt. In fact, if you don't, then it's quite hard for you to properly plan. So we can start thinking, okay, well, it's interesting here because look, there's a contrast between the world outside and the world inside the bus. Outside the bus sounds quite positive. It's quite positive here. Inside the bus, it's quite negative. There's a real fairy palaces opal and silver contrasting with the sickening smell and oozing. So you can already start to see, and you can start thinking, I really like those 2 words, and I want to write about how those 2 words build a picture. You can talk about here were fairy palaces. That's a metaphor that's being used there. So you can start to begin to think, okay, I'm going to unpick it, I'm going to circle this, I'm going to make a few notes. And just 1 or 2 words around the outside of the passage, it just means that you're starting to analyse it even before you write. So let's look now at a couple of potential answers. Rather than us go through and construct an answer ourselves, what I'd like to do is look at a potential sort of a grade 5-6 answer, which in old money would have been about a grade C, and then a grade 7-8 answer, which is tipping towards the A and the A star, and look at the contrast between those 2 particular answers. Let's just go in here. Let's just go back into our... Okay, so here's our sample grade 5-6 answer. The writer uses positive language to describe the view from the bus on Rosabelle's journey home. The jewellers' shops are fairy palaces, an image to suggest that the light shining on the steamed-up bus windows makes the building sparkle and appear dreamlike and magical. However, negative language is then used to portray the stuffy atmosphere inside the bus. She says the people seem to resolve into one meaningless staring face, a metaphor to imply that everyone looks alike, blurs into one dull ordinary group going about their pointless everyday lives. In this way, the writer's use of language contrasts Rosabelle's imaginary world outside the bus with what her life is really like. Okay, so what is this answer doing? It's not a bad answer, and you'd expect this to be getting at the top, at the levels, the grade 6 here. So what's it doing quite well? Well, it brings in a couple of quotes. There we are, fairy palaces resolve into one meaningless staring face. It's bringing in some language that shows the writer's able to explain, to analyse, so suggests that, used to portray, to imply that. These are what we might call analytical signposts. And what I mean is, or markers. And what I mean by that is the examiner, by seeing you using implies that, suggests, used to portray, it shows the examiner that you're about to go on and do some analysis. And if you look at that last one, to imply that everyone looks alike and blurs into one dull ordinary group. So you've taken the seem to resolve into one meaningless staring face, and then you have rephrased it into your own words to show that you not only do you understand what the quote means, but you understand the effect that it has on the reader. And then there's some technical language, an image, metaphor, and using words like contrasts. These are sort of technical terms that show that you're ticking that second half of the AO2 box. So it's a pretty good answer. And if also that last sentence, in this way, the writer's use of language, it's like you're summarising at the end of the paragraph everything that you've said in that paragraph. Okay, let's have a look at now at a better quality answer, and you begin to be able to see the difference between this answer and the next one. So this is the grade 7-8 answer. The writer employs very different language to describe the view from the bus and the claustrophobic, mundane atmosphere within it. As the light catches the misty window panes, jewellers' shops are transformed into fairy palaces for Rosabelle. Metaphorically, these shops symbolise a dreamlike fantasy world full of sparkle, magic and enchantment. a world that is completely unobtainable for a lower-class shopgirl like her. However, the passengers inside the bus are described collectively as one meaningless staring face, suggesting their features are indistinguishable. They have blurred into a single anonymous being that personifies the hollow, pointless existence that seems to be their lives. The bus journey home, the writer's use of language contrasts the outside world of Rosabel's hopes and dreams with the inside reality of her life. That's a really good answer. You're not going to get a much better answer than that. And certainly if I saw that sort of answer, I'd be looking to give it pretty well top marks. So why? Okay, well, again, it's bringing some well-chosen quotes through, fairy palaces and the meaningless staring face. It's not using a huge number of quotes, but it's using a couple of quotes well-chosen. It's really using a lot of sophisticated language, employs mundane, metaphorically, symbolises enchantment, collectively indistinguishable. We've got personified, we've got so many words here which really are quite sophisticated and advanced use of language. We've got a really interesting use of a linking connective in however, and what that does is it divides the passage into two. On the one hand, we have the positive outside, however, on the other, there's a negative inside. It's a really, really good technique to show that the student really understands the contrast between the two halves of the passage. And then there's a great use of a colon, the after indistinguishable. Now, again, this is another what we call analytical signpost and another marker, because what you've done is you've brought in a quote and then you've put a colon, and then what follows the colon is analysis. They've blurred into a single anonymous being that personifies the hollow, pointless existence that seems to be their lives. Now, you can look at that sentence and you can almost say what part of those sentences might get you a grade 3 or a grade 4, what get you a grade 5, grade 6, what get you grade 7, grade 8. If you were to go, the passengers inside the bus are described collectively as one meaningless staring face, that might get you a 3 or a 4. And then if you go suggesting their features are indistinguishable, they've blurred into a single, or just suggesting their features are indistinguishable, grade 5, grade 6. But then the colon, blurred into a single anonymous being, personifies hollow, pointless existence that seems to be their lives. Can you see? It's just one extra thing that you've said. So you brought the quote in, you've said one thing, and then you've said another thing. That's the key here. With the top grades, you say one thing, and then you say something else. And the colon is a really good way of doing that. And then finally here, there's that final summary sentence, a little bit like the other one, but again, a little bit more advanced. The writer's use of language contrasts the outside world of Rosabel's hopes and dreams with the inside reality of her life. It's a really, really good use of a summary sentence just to sum up everything that you've said before. So just quickly remember, this question is going to test you on how well you understand how writers use language. Use the right languagey language, metaphors, contrasts, similes, alliteration, whatever it is you want to use the right sort of technical language. Use the bullet points to structure your answer. Just to remember this, more detail on this, including some practice examples that you can use yourself on the website and also in the book.